All right, welcome back. So, again, congrats on making it here because this is again your one of your biggest milestones in the front end section because now you have completed HTML as well as CSS, right? So now you have covered a large part of front end, and now what we're going to move to is the next big part of front end, which will actually let you know add some functionality to your page, like executing some code if you're pressing something or these kinds of things, which is JavaScript. So now we're going to start with JavaScript. And first things first, why do you even need to know what JavaScript is? So as I said, this will help you make your page a little bit functional. Your page will still be static, and static basically means that it will display the same content at all times. You could see this as a crude definition right now. So it will still be static, but you can make it a little functional, right? Like let's say you want to change something on your page. It's fixed that you want to change this to this when a button is pressed. Then you would use JavaScript. And JavaScript, we are going to use JavaScript in the backend too. You could do backend with other languages too, but front end is always reliant on JavaScript, no matter what language you use for the backend. And we'll get to that again as we progress, and you'll see why JavaScript is actually really useful. And the second thing is that JavaScript is basically, if you've never coded before until now, this is your introduction to the whole programming world, not just web development, right? And why am I saying that? Because you might have heard this or you might not have heard this from someone who already is into development, that switching from a language to another language is really simple. And that is basically because these all are object-oriented languages. Now you don't know what those are, and don't worry about that. But JavaScript comes in a family of a really large set of languages, right? I know a lot of languages. I know Java, C++, Python, JavaScript, and you can switch between any one of them really easily, and it will not take you a lot of time to switch. Only the syntaxes are different, but basic functioning of everything remains the same. Python is a little different, but it still comes under the object oriented umbrella, right? So this is just some talk about why JavaScript, and of course we are going to deal with JavaScript in the rest of the course, and so you will see why it is so useful. Alright, so now let's just start. And before I tell you what this video is aimed at, I want to show you something known as the console. So what is the console? Console is not something you would, use extensively, and which would actually play a really big role when you're writing code to make a project. But this is a really nice place to test out some JavaScript code. So what is it? If I go to inspect, this is an area which we are quite familiar with now. We have the styles here, some different kind of things here, elements here, but this is the tab that I'm talking about, right? This is the console, and in here you can write any JavaScript you want. So let's say I do something like x equal to 4. Don't worry what that is for now, but I can write any JavaScript I want in this console right here. And this console can be used to change this page. However, as soon as you refresh, those changes will be gone. But the thing is that this is a really nice place to test out your JavaScript, or like in the learning right now, we are going to use the console a lot. And because to link it actually to an HTML file, you would have to know some other things, and that is why to test out your JavaScript while learning, it is really good to try it out on the console first, right? So this is the console. It comes from inspect, and then you just do this console tab in set of elements. Alright, so now we can start with actual JavaScript, right? So before you start with anything, you need to know what data types are in any programming language, right? And specifically for JavaScript, and these are the data types in a lot of other languages too, but now we're going to talk about specifically JavaScript, right? So JavaScript has 5 primitive types. So first of all, what is a data type? Now, of course, if you are making a web page, or if you're making a web app or a mobile app, doesn't matter whatever you're making, you will have data, right? We have data in this course, we have data everywhere. You cannot make something without data. That's evident, right? So what every programming language has is a functionality to detect the type of data that you have given it. Like a programming language has the capability to differentiate between a number and a sentence of words, right? So now in JavaScript there are 5 primitive data types. Like, so even if you're not clear, which I don't think this will happen because this is kind of the only definition for data types, but if you're not clear, you will become clear by the end of this video, so do not worry about that. Alright, so specifically for JavaScript now, so 5 primitive types. So JavaScript gives us 5 primitive types and built-in types that we can use. We'll see we can build R types too later on, forget about that. So these are the 5 types we have. So let's talk about them one by one, and the way we're going to talk about them is through the console. And I highly recommend you open your console too, because this will help you get comfortable with the console too, which you're going to need a lot. So the first is number, and number, as evident, is simply just a number. And in this console, if you just enter a number or a sentence, it will throw that back at you. And there's nothing being done here. This is just primitive. You can enter anything, and that's thrown back at you as an output. So this is this, and so a number is basically any number. Now, in other programming languages, there are methods to differentiate between a decimal number, something like 12, and something like 13.5. So having a decimal or not having a decimal in your number does not make a difference in JavaScript. Other programming languages it does, but in JavaScript it does not. For JavaScript, 12 minus 12, 12.5, minus 12.5, everything is the same. This is just a number, right? So yeah, so that is what a number is. And now for a number, you can have a limited set of, like, you will use a limited set of operations mostly. You will not use a whole lot of operations. So what they basically are the 4 elementary operations that we have: add, subtract, multiply, divide. So you could do something like 3 plus 4 here, and if you press enter, this gives you 7. You could do 4 minus 3, this gives you 1. You could do 3 minus 4, this gives you minus 1. You could do 3, so star 4. And if you're new to programming, I know this might be new to you, but star is used for representing multiplication and not x. So 3 star 4 gives you 12. And for division, you would use forward slash. So 3 by 4 gives you 0.75. So these are the 4 basic functionalities that you can get for a number, right? And there's one more thing, that the remainder operator is quite used in a lot of languages, including JavaScript. So if you want to find a remainder of something, you do not necessarily have to write a lot of code. What you have to do is simply, let's say we want to find the remainder of 5 when divided by 4. So you can use the percentage sign. So percentage is basically known as the modulo operator, right? And this is the operator that gives you the remainder. So if you do x mod y at any point of time, this will obviously not work right now because there is no such thing as x and y. But x mod y will give you the remainder when x is divided by y, right? And this will be a little useful later on, quite useful instead, right? So this is what a number is. So now I'm going to clear my console. Right. So Now the next data type is string. So what is a string? A string is basically just, a set of characters which you can do a lot of operations on. So a string would be a sentence, and this is a string. Now this is a sentence, however, if you press enter right now, you get a syntax error. So first of all, what is a syntax error? A syntax is the way of writing your code, right? And error is basically that you made some mistake or some typo while writing your code. So if you're new to programming, this might seem a little new, and that is why I'm specifically pointing it out. This will become really, easy to you later on. So the reason we get a syntax error is because, if we type 4, we get 4. Then why don't we get this is a string when typing this is a string? That is because all the strings need to be inside of a set of quotes, right? So this is what we get. This is a string inside of quotes, gives back this is a string inside of quotes, and quotes just mean a string. You could also have single quotes here. And you see we get the same output as the above. So these codes don't matter in this. And again, this is specifically for JavaScript. They will matter in some other languages. Alright, so now I want you to think of a thing. What's the difference between 43 and this 43? Well, the only difference is that this is an integer and this is a string. So even though the characters inside of a string are integers, this is still a string, and that is because this is inside of double quotes. So if you do something like this, will not give you 50, right? This will give you 437. And why this gives you 437 is basically because if you had two strings, it just joins them and gives you back. So if you do this, gives you hello world. So you can do something like this, and we see 43 and 7 in quotes added give us 437, and without quotes they would give us 50. And that is because these are integers and these are simple strings. So JavaScript will not pass them differently to be 43 and 7 integers. It will just take it as a string. It will join them, and concatenating is the word that is used for join. So it will concatenate them and it throws out 437. So that is a number and a string. Now you can do a lot of things with a string. You can, you can take a specific part of it, or you can iterate over it. What iterate means is that you can access the elements one by one. So there's a lot of things that you can do with a string, and there are a lot of functions that are built in to do operations on strings, and we'll see them as we move along and as we need them, right? Right now we are going to move to the next data type, which is Boolean. So what is Boolean? A Boolean is just something which has two values, that is true or false, and that is all a Boolean is. So all these data types is, you might be thinking how they would come in useful, but we'll see that later. And for now you can see that I'll just tell you that there are a set of variables. Now we'll study more about variables in next, or probably next to next video. So a variable is something in a programming language which can take variable data in itself. So you could have something like x, and you could give it a value of 4. And then later on, you might want to change this value and you would do something like x is equal to 5. And you could give any value to x now, right? So that is what a variable is. And a variable always has a data type. So again, this is just a really quick description, and we are going to spend time on it, and you will be comfortable with variables really soon. But for now, I just want you to know that if it is a Boolean, then it can have only two values, either true or false, right? Boolean can only take true or false, and that is it. No other thing is possible. right? And the last two data types are null and undefined. So if you have data anywhere, it will mostly be of these three types. However, imagine not having data, right? And null is basically you have data, but this is not usable data, right? So like if you have a string, but it is not defined to be any sentence, right? It is not defined to be empty string 2. Even this is not null, you know? Yeah. Even this is a string. This is not null. But you have something like this. If you have nothing, then that is null. And people often get confused between null and undefined. So the difference between null and undefined is that undefined means that you do not have anything there. The value isn't even defined, right? But null means that the value is defined, but it is just not a valid value that you can use for any operations, right? This indicates that most of the times having a null value will be used to indicate that basically this place does not have any usable value right now, so do not do the operation that you were aiming to do with this particular set of data, right? Or give it a particular set of data first and then you can do the operations, because currently the value it has is just null, right? It's void, it's nothing there, but it is defined, and undefined means that the place isn't even defined, right? So if you try to access something where the data is null, you will get null as the answer. But if you try to access something which is undefined, you will get an error, because what you're trying to access doesn't even exist in JavaScript, right? And null does exist, but it is not valid data, right? It is valid data, but it is not the valid data that you would need in your operations, right? So these are the 5 primitive data types of JavaScript, right? So these are number, string, boolean, null, and undefined. And just to revise, number is any number. It could be a positive number, negative number, decimal, anything, right? And string is basically a sentence. Everything here is represented by a string. This data types is a string. And one thing, that having a space in between does not terminate your string, right? A string is not a word. It could be a word, but by definition it is a sentence, so you can have spaces in between, and everything you put inside of double quotes is always a string, right? So boolean is just true or false. You can have true or you can have false, and that's it. Null means the data is defined, but it is not valid data to use in your program. And undefined means that the data isn't even defined, and hence you cannot access it, or you will get an error, right? So that is all for this video. I'll see you in the next one.